Still to come, the DPRK leader welcomes a new age of peace as he crosses the South Korean border for talks with his counterpart. We will talk about the significance of this summit right after this break. World Insight coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. I'm Tian Wei. Let's move on to the Truce village of Panmunjom, where the South Korean President Moon Jae-in has met the leader of the DPRK, Kim Jong Un, and the world today has been watching very closely. It was the first time a DPRK leader crossed the border to the south. The two heads of state also signed a joint declaration confirming their common goal of the peninsula's complete denuclearization.
A historic moment on the Korean Peninsula. Kim Jong Un has become the first DPRK leader to step on South Korean soil since the Korean War armistice more than 6 decades ago. He also invited President Moon Jae-in to briefly step across the border and visit the north. Moon held an official welcoming ceremony in front of the Peace House, and then the two leaders entered the building for a 2-hour closed-door meeting.
말씀드린 것처럼 정말 수시로 만나서 걸린 문제를 풀어나가고 오늘 이 자리에서 평화 번영, 북남관계가 정말 새로운 역사가 씌워지는 그런 순간에 이런 출발점에 서서
우리 남북의 국민들 또 해외 동포들이 거는 기대도 아주 큽니다. 그만큼 우리 두 사람 어깨가 무겁다고 생각합니다.
After the official dialogue, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong Un took part in a ceremony planting a pine tree on the demarcation line. He also walked and chatted on the historical border footbridge, which was built by officers of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission after the armistice was concluded. The two leaders then made a joint statement and announced both sides will work together to turn the armistice into a peace treaty to encourage inter-Korean exchanges and to achieve the complete denuclearization of the peninsula.
오늘 김정은 위원장과 나는
Today, Chairman Kim Jong Un and I confirmed that our shared goal is to rid the Korean Peninsula of nuclear weapons through complete denuclearization.
우리가 오늘 북과 남이 전체 인민들과 세계가 지켜보는 가운데 수표한
We will make efforts to create good results by communicating closely in order to make sure our agreement signed today before the entire world will not end as just a beginning like previous agreements before today.
There were 2 other inter-Korean summits in the peninsula's history. The first was in 2000 when South Korean President Kim Dae-jung flew to Pyongyang to meet DPRK leader Kim Jong-il. The second summit came 7 years later with President Roh Moo-hyun. There was hardly a rapprochement on the peninsula in the past 11 years, when since the beginning of 2018, the DPRK and the ROK made breakthroughs in their relations. And this third summit is expected to have a long-term outcome.
So really a new history or a new age of peace? Is that dream or reality? Let's ask our panelists. Very strong panel joining us from Shanghai in China. Shending Li, a professor of Institute of International Studies at Fudan University. Welcome, Professor Shen. In Washington, D.C., we have Jenny Tao, Assistant Director of U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. In Los Angeles, we are joined by Jonathan Pollack, non-resident senior fellow with the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. Okay, couldn't be bigger a day that we have been expecting for more than 11 years. But now, are you getting more optimistic or more realistic? Let's put it that way. Ms. Tao.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it was great to see Kim Jong Un in South Korea. It was great to see the rapprochement between the two Koreas. They said all the right things. There was a lot of it telegraphed ahead of time, so we knew what to expect, and I think it sort of lived up to the expectations. But committing to finding solutions is not the same as resolving the issues. And so I think there is a lot of road to be traveled now. But it's important that Kim Jong Un did commit in writing to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and now I think the hard work comes in, again, unpacking what that means and finding a common understanding and actually creating an action plan now going forward, which is part of the task now of the U.S. DPRK summit.
Right. Mr. Polak, you could say, I've been there, I've heard that over the decades you've been working on this issue. So let me ask you also directly, are you more optimistic or more realistic?
Well, I would generally align with what Jenny Town just said. It was striking, though, that President Moon said before the summit that his highest priority at the summit would be denuclearization. And in the joint statement, I haven't seen the Korean text of it yet, but as released by the South Koreans, denuclearization comes last, not first. Now, in a way, we shouldn't be surprised. But I think that this meeting was, in a way, the outcome was telegraphed in advance by the two sides. If there's one thing that I can feel better about, it is that the discussion of war, for now, seems very much off the table. And that on that basis alone, we can say that things are better than they could be, but with an enormous amount of uncertainty. We've been here before many, many times. Protestations of peaceful intent and so forth are fine, but they don't really answer the fundamental questions that have not been addressed, to my knowledge.
Well, I don't know about you, but I did celebrate it with a bowl of noodle. I hope you would do the same thing as well. But at least for today, Mr. Polak, given your knowledge. But let me go to you, Professor Shen. What about you? From China's perspective, a time to really reflect or a time to really begin to work hard?
Well, I feel quite hopeful through the joint statement released this afternoon. The statement made 3 points. First, to improve relationship. Second, to reduce hostility. And third, to make peace. I noticed that the key part of denuclearization has come last, and with very short statement. But the summit has much achieved, even a big picture, how to improve relationship, how to reduce largely the bilateral, mutual kind of hostility, and how to make enduring peace. The good statement, the good words, the good rhetorics, which bodes well for the follow-up interaction between the two Koreans. But at the beginning, I did not expect that the two sides would make a big statement on denuclearization. This is to be reserved for the next summit between Trump and Kim Jong Un. They are going to talk about denuclearization and in parallel how to improve North Korean and the U.S. relationship. So this inter-Korean summit does not mean they would not settle the denuclearization, but this is largely an issue between the U.S. and North Korea.
Right.
If the two Koreans would settle this issue today, there would be no business to talk for Trump and Kim Jong Un.
Mr. Polak, did you see? Professor Shen see it totally from another perspective. In order to get President Trump still in job, well, the two sides are leaving some space for the U.S. North Korea talk. But having said that, putting joke aside, what about that phrase, the goal of complete denuclearization? Isn't that the word that many of the sides are really looking forward to? And it is appearing in the declaration, no matter how short it is. Mr. Polak.
Well, the phrase complete denuclearization, it's kind of code language depending on who's using it. For the United States, in terms of things that very senior U.S. officials have repeatedly said, Complete denuclearization means complete denuclearization, which presumably would mean the elimination of any weapons that North Korea may possess, the destruction of the infrastructure for creating more of such weapons. It would be related also to missile capabilities and so forth. So that's a very tall order in and of itself. For Kim Jong Un, he's talking about something else. He's talking about the degrading and ultimately the removal of U.S. security guarantees to South Korea. In other words, to rid the Korean Peninsula of the U.S. ROK alliance. And very frankly, in Kim's party speech from a few days ago, he made very, very clear that their weapons are an accomplished fact. They're not going away.
Okay.
He wants this treated as an arms control negotiation, not a disarmament negotiation. So we are worlds apart. And whether or not Trump and Kim, assuming they meet as planned, can find a way to bridge that gap in wording is a very, very tall order.
But you know, Ms. Tao, I mean, one text, different interpretation. Isn't that the art of diplomacy too? I mean, we've seen that in history so many times. Having said that, though, what about that commitment of so-called complete denuclearization? Earlier, Mr. Polak tried to, from his perspective, interpret it from the U.S. version and also the North Korean version. Of course, we do not know what the North Korean version is because we haven't managed, after even very hard try, to get a North Korean guest on this debate. But from your perspective, how would you interpret that if there is going to be the summit? What's likely to be the step-by-step plan that the two sides should be able to talk up to each other between the North and the United States?
Well, I think Kim Jong Un has been very clever, actually, in the way that he's proceeded in this plan, because by declaring that his nuclear force is already done, it actually gives him a lot of room to talk about denuclearization as a phased plan and to move through those easy phases quickly. So because he doesn't have to do more development testing and doesn't have to demonstrate new capabilities, he can give concessions very quickly on such things as a testing regime and on testing infrastructure, even, for instance, fissile material production and fissile material production infrastructure, if he's already comfortable with the programs that he has. And so when you talk about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, it does create obligations on all sides. And it does mean also that it's contingent on a fundamental change in the political relationship between all these parties. And so what he can do now is move through those easy phases first, get rid of the development side of the infrastructure, while they work on changing the political situation and still keeping, hedging and keeping some capability until that political situation and political relationship has actually changed to a point where they believe in the security guarantees.
Right. Professor Shen from China, we heard from Mr. Lu Kang, who's a spokesperson from Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, responding to the latest event between the North and the South Korea. He's been talking about the hope from China about both the reconciliation and cooperation between the two sides. He did not elaborate exactly on what kinds of reconciliation and cooperation. Professor Shen, how would that work? Also within the big text of complete denuclearization, but at the same time, it is going with the development of a peace treaty. We don't want to forget that either, Professor Shen.
Well, the U.S. side has stressed the need for a quicker CVID. Comprehensive, irreversible, verifiable dismantlement. North Korea say, okay, dismantlement, but it has to be Korean Peninsula-wide. So I may need to go to South Korea to inspect the U.S. military facility to see if that is nuclear weapon-free. And secondly, for North Korea to build denuclearization, a nuclear weapon-free North Korea should not feel threat from the U.S. And then the U.S. had to do a lot of things to make North Korea feel satisfied. Otherwise, North Korea is not going to do nuclear disarmament. Therefore, the inter-Korean joint statement today stated that this process ought to be a phased program, which means North Korea would do something to reduce its nuclear threat, and the U.S. side would do something to reduce its overall threat. So this kind of two-wheel, action for action, phased, incremental. So that is much different from what President Trump has demanded. Therefore, there are still lots of uncertainty whether Mr. Trump is going to stick to his idea. Without meeting his demand, he would go away from his talk. I think Trump and Kim Jong Un have high stake that they cannot afford to lose. If they would fail their meeting, it's bad for both of them. Therefore, how to make a kind of compromise? U.S. would say, you commit in principle, you are going to totally disarm as quickly as possible. But I may allow you to do it in 3-5 years.
Right.
And North Korea may work out a detailed program with U.S. And this is a kind of trust building. And in between, they need to do a lot of reconciliation, people-to-people contact, and also kind of a reunion of separate family and military confidence building.
I'm afraid you're going too fast. I'm afraid, Professor. You're going too fast in the plan already. Let's just talk about some of the steps that you are hoping for before the next phase of steps. I know we've all been waiting for that for decades, so everybody hopes things will be fast and also in the positive direction. Every one of you feels that. But let me ask you a very direct question, Professor Shen, and briefly answer, please, as well. What about the South Korean position? I mean, from your perspective, is South Korea likely to be caught in between? Because after all, it is South Korean President Moon Jae-in getting this deal, getting this promise, getting this statement, declaration. And he needs to go to Washington and to talk to President Trump. After that, sorry, I have to finish. After that, after the North and the U.S. talk, they have to come up with something. If they cannot come up with something, then South Korea seems to be caught in between and have to choose in a way. So, Professor Shen, go ahead.
South Korea need a peace, and a peace has to be guaranteed through denuclearization. But how to achieve it? South Korea clearly knows realistically that North Korea is not going to do CVID. But if South Korea would push for CVID, the Kim Jong Un Trump talk would collapse. That South Korea would hate to see. Therefore, through the rehearsal of the U.S.-North Korean meeting, by staging the today inter-Korean meeting, South Korea tried to work out a roadmap with which North Korea and the U.S. can make a compromise. They are going to meet, they are going to make a commitment, and they are willing to do it incrementally. This is what the South Korean try to nurture, to be a shepherd, to make North Korea and the U.S. to meet without failing.
Okay, incrementally, is that what Washington gonna accept, Ms. Tao, very briefly?
That's what's really unclear. What is incrementally? And this administration in the U.S. has very little patience for a long, drawn-out process. And so I think that's the devil is in the details, right? So it's a matter of what are we talking about in terms of timing. How much can be front-loaded, how much will be back-loaded, and can they find a mutually agreed-upon plan? And that's what we'll have to wait and see. But that is the big question as to how do we move forward in this process.
Right, but at the same time, Mr. Pollack, does the United States have other choices besides going instrumental, or incremental rather, with the North, as the North has already acquired quite some capabilities? You know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yes, right. President Trump has insisted he will not go down the path that his predecessors have gone down. And I think what you can see already is that he will have no alternative but to go down to that path. What North Korea is seeking above all right now is relief from the sanctions, which are hurting them. There's no question. But then that exactly gets into the game of a negotiating process, telling me that North Korea is not going to simply yield all of its weapons in some kind of a magic formula. So, very frankly, the concern that I have is that in the context of a Kim-Trump meeting, if it does not go well, and it might not go well, we could very easily find ourselves back where we were only a few months ago, with all the fears and risks that we could be on the edge of a conflict.
See, the two sides has really set the story up to an even more exciting level. People are already looking forward to that summit between the North and the United States, and there will be a lot of debates in between. Before we go, I do want to have every one of you a very frank and direct answer. If it could be within 30 seconds, it would be just wonderful. Tell me, what is the next thing you are looking at to see whether things are really going great or even as before, bad? Professor Shen, I'd like to go first.
I hope the U.S. and North Korea would show their sincerity and honesty to build trust with each other. Based on that, the U.S. and North Korea are willing to do it a phased program.
I see. Mr. Pollack, what about you?
I am going to be watching very closely about how this summit and next steps are described in North Korean media. That will reveal a lot whether or not North Korea is intent on any different kind of a course. We haven't seen any of that yet, and it bears very, very close watching, because that's what's conveyed to a domestic audience in North Korea, who so far have known nothing about any kind of pledges about denuclearization.
And what about for you, Ms. Tao? I know you've been watching North Korea constantly over the years with many of the references you've provided to the rest of the world about exactly what's going on inside the DPRK. Tell me more about your thought now.
You know, I don't think it's as important as how North Korea portrays it to their domestic audience. I think it's more important that, one, that they stick to the freeze on testing, that there's no more provocations. Because even then, if U.S.-DPRK relations, if the summit doesn't work out the way they planned, I think they will still have, it'll be much harder to go back to this sort of war stance that we had at the end of last year, as long as they're not doing provocations. So I think we'll be watching to see, you know, what is happening at all the WMD sites, and how seriously is the administration taking the preparation for the summit, because that will really be the key here.
Right. I know it is quite early morning for our American guest. Well, it is already late night here in Beijing, but I really wondered whether we should drink some coffee to calm down or more Korean wine to cheer it up. But anyway, at least something to celebrate about, at least for today. We've been waiting it for long. We hope tomorrow could be better, at least on the road to be better. For now, I want to really express my appreciation to the three of you. Shending Li, Jenny Tao, Jonathan Pollack. We together spend a very significant evening together. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN on your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. The weekend is up. Have a great one, everyone. I know it's going to be a busy weekend, though. See you next week.